Transitions to number 3, we have a great transition effect here, and that is a video. Senator Sherrod Brown is the first Ohio senator in almost 50 years to serve on the Senate Agricultural Committee. He's a consistent advocate of sound nutrition policy and committed to ending childhood hunger. He's very disappointed in being unable to be here in person today, but he gives us great leadership to our issue and graciously provides an important message by way of video technology. And while we're showing this video, I'm going to ask the third panel to come on up and get mic'd up and ready to run, because we have a very ambitious schedule. So is the Sherrod Brown video ready? Let's run it.
Hi, I'm Sherrod Brown from Ohio. I'm sorry I can't be with you today. My thanks to the Ohio State University's Food Innovation Center and the newly elevated, if you will, Glenn College of Public Affairs for inviting me to speak and for organizing this important summit. The release of new dietary guidelines provides new challenges and new opportunities for business and policymakers in the food sector. In Ohio, we're one of the leading producers of food, from Dannon yogurt to V8 and many things in between. As the first Ohioan on the Senate Agriculture Committee in almost 50 years, I was proud to be on the 2014 Farm Bill House-Senate Conference, and proud that our work resulted in bringing the bill to the President's desk. The Farm Bill included provisions to expand access to healthy local foods and to provide support for producers to grow their businesses and create jobs. Americans are looking to lead healthier lifestyles, and new research, some of it from those of you here today, is allowing us to better understand the important link between diet and health outcomes. As business owners, policymakers, and doctors, we must rise to meet these new opportunities. We must continue to ensure that access to healthy foods isn't based on income or where you live. That's why this summit's so important. Talk to one another, brainstorm ideas, network with each other. We need to keep the conversation going. Thank you for your work to improve America's health and to increase access to nutritious foods for everyone all over the country.
These are great questions. How do we bring healthy foods to scale across all sectors? The DGA scientific report notes the food environment is becoming increasingly complex, creating a need for new tools and approaches to support good health. Our panel moderator is Professor Neal Hooker from the newly formed Ohio State University John Glenn College of Public Affairs. That just happened last month. Neal is a professor of food policy, and his research explores policy, marketing, and management issues within the global food supply chain. He published over 60 journal articles and book chapters and is a reviewer for many government agencies, grant programs, and academic journals. Neal is also a very active member and outstanding diplomat of the Ohio State Food Innovation Center. Neal helped us bring us this unique collaboration with the Glenn College on this summit, and he shares his unique expertise in food policy as our last panel leader, looking at how healthy foods get to scale. Where's your panelists, Neal?
They're not going to be videoed in, but they are about to come in.
Okay.
Stage right. And as they do, or ahead of that time, allow me to introduce them. That way they can hit the ground running, and I know this panel certainly will be able to do that. Hank Cardello is director of the Obesity Solutions Initiative at the Hudson Institute. He comes with a lifetime of industry experience. So in part, we'll play that role on this panel as a critical bellwether of how we can encourage industry to reformulate and innovate. Debra Eschmeyer is the executive director of the Let's Move campaign out of the White House and is the strongest and most vocal advocate for nutrition and food policy within the executive branch. Already today, and I've kind of given her a heads up on this, we've heard at least 2 people recommend the need for a new White House Commission on Food and Nutrition Policy. So let's have this opportunity to ensure that opportunity gets raised to Deb as well. Debra is a producer, amongst other things. She is the co-founder of Food Corps, which was an exact indication of what we'll talk on this panel of moving from members of the supply chain into engagement, and now in her current role towards discussions with actual decision makers here within DC. Our next speaker, or next panelist, is the Honorable Dan Glickman, a former Secretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and an advocate for recognizing that to move forward, we have to do so in a bipartisan and collaborative manner, not in a manner of conflict. Our final speaker, actually 3 seats over to me, is Jeff Lenard, who is the Vice President of Strategic Industry Initiatives for the National Association of Convenience Stores. Jeff will mention, I am sure, that if you want to have a touch point to the majority of American citizens every day, it is through his member retailers that the best opportunity to reach the broadest part of our population is through convenience stores. Everybody's comfortable?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is obviously a really easy opening question, with some sarcasm in mind. So many recent studies have talked about the shared responsibility of dietary behavior change. We heard in a prior panel the challenge of making or encouraging consumers to make good behavior changes. But if it's a shared responsibility of firms throughout the supply chain, producers, processors, distributors, and wholesalers, and restaurateurs, as Ken called out, that we're going to see a dietary guidelines committee for food service. A shared responsibility also with consumers, and a classic example of a public-private partnership. Can you each recount from your current experience a good example of how such a public-private partnership has encouraged behavior change for diet? Secretary Glickman?
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. Even though I went to the University of Michigan, I hope you won't
We won't hold
against
that.
me.
The one up north.
You know, so I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said that for every complicated problem, there is a simple and a wrong solution. And nowhere is that more true than in food and food-related issues, where everybody has the silver bullet to lose weight, to create everlasting life, to, you know, and everything in between. And so as I think we heard from the last panel, which I was fortunate to hear a part of, it's just not true. There are many, many pieces of this. So at the Bipartisan Policy Center, where I'm affiliated with now, we've decided of all the conflict issues there are, this is one that maybe we can try to get some consensus about. And so it was the chairs are myself and Secretary Shalala, Secretary Veneman, and Secretary Leavitt, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, 2 Ag, 2 Health, to try to bring in as much holistic in here. So I would just mention one issue that we've been working on, which is with the Department of Defense. It's called the Healthy Base Initiative. So the Pentagon has a great control group, soldiers and sailors and airmen and airwomen, and you can really kind of gauge and measure behavior and change. And so they've identified several bases around with all the branches of the services. We've been helping them to do what they do very well about in terms of diet, sleep. They found that sleep was perhaps the most important thing in the whole area of actually physical health and prevention techniques. And with that, then measuring how it's working. Now, granted, it's a control group that doesn't necessarily reflect exactly everything that's happening in society, but it's a pretty good mix of the food industry, the government, in which case the largest part of the United States government, which is the Pentagon, and a variety of healthcare professionals who are engaged in working through this thing. And the results seem to be positive so far. And, you know, you got 2 million people who are in that particular branch of government. Not only a very, very small percentage of them are being served, but how to get them to eat healthier, how to get them to eat less high-fat, high-caloric, calorie-dense foods, particularly at fast food restaurants, which tend to have historically proliferated around military bases. And then the thing I just mentioned, which they found, is sleep is such an important part of this issue, and it's just hardly ever discussed when we're talking about all these other things. And so it's just one avenue. And asked me to give you one example.
Yes, that's an excellent example. Thank you, Dan. Deborah?
Yeah, I feel like I should shout out OH.
I-O.
Hey! That was a little weak, Ohio.
Can I say go blue as well?
Yeah, it's fair, it's fair. Well, I could give a lot of examples here because Let's Move was kind of built around public-private partnerships. There's 10 sub-initiatives from Let's Move Salad Bars to Schools, to Let's Move Childcare, to Let's Move Cities, Towns, and Counties. And all of the different initiatives have some federal partner, a nonprofit partner, and they all work together to try to create this solution. But one particular partnership I think would be fun to highlight is that the Partnership for a Healthier America worked together with the Produce Marketing Association and Sesame Street so that they could license for free the Sesame Street characters for the PMA community of retailers and growers. So you could have Big Bird on broccoli, and you could have, Elmo on the banana, encouraging kids to eat healthy fruits and vegetables. And it's just an example of what's possible to encourage healthier eating and following the dietary guidelines.
Excellent. Thank you, Deborah. Jeff?
It didn't take me long to mention convenience stores and their reach. We reach 160 million people a day, whether it's at the pump or inside the store. So if you didn't go to a convenience store today, you probably will tomorrow, and if you didn't one of those 2 days, somebody made up for you. So we have 152,000 stores in the country, 34% of retail according to Nielsen. So when you talk about that reach, when we reach out to people or ask for groups that we can work with, we find more often than not, people say, yes, we want to help. This is a big deal. We can be part of the problem, or be part of the solution, I'm sorry. So, we'll get to that.
We'll edit that out, don't worry.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post. But, so when you look at some of the partnerships that we've had in the past year, we have 4 convenience store chains that are now part of Partnership for Healthier America. That represents more than 1,000 stores across the country. We're working with the Cornell Food Lab. We're working with United Fresh, which represents the produce manufacturers. Hank's giving us some guidance on healthy eating. So we are reaching out to everyone we possibly can. They're all saying yes. At the same time, anybody that reaches out to us, I'm more than likely to say yes, because we feel we really can play a role in this.
Thank you. Hank?
Well, we've been involved with several of these initiatives, as Jeff just mentioned, and also the Healthy Base Initiative Partnership for a Healthy America. The other one we've also been involved in is the Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, where 16 of the largest food and beverage companies came together and made a calorie commitment. And they ended up reducing calories by 6.4 trillion calories out of the food supply. So again, this is an opportunity to come at it from the other end. In other words, one of the things that I've learned that seems to work is when commitments, hard commitments, are being made. So as an example with Partnership for a Healthy America, I mean, Dannon is one of your sponsors. There's some hard commitments to improve nutrition which are being met. Same with the caloric commitments. So industry, I think the key point that would make for good collaborations is that there has to be a win-win. In other words, we have to understand from all perspectives. So from the public health perspective, we're trying to address obesity, diabetes, getting Americans to eat healthier. At the same time, we have to recognize where industry comes from, and they only care about one word. It's called growth, whether it's growing dollar sales or profits, market share, et cetera. So how do we find those alignment areas where we can accomplish the public health goal and also help industry come along? I think that's the sweet spot, no pun intended, for us to be able to take advantage of.
Dan?
I just want to mention one thing, because other than fresh fruits and vegetables, largely traditional production agriculture is not a part of this discussion. And, you know, I represented this department. And it's not, there was a question raised by somebody out there about this. It really is not all their fault. I mean, the issues are very complicated. But the relationship between agriculture, food, and health has not been in the public discussion until very, very recently. So just one thing, I do some work for the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. We had this big meeting a few weeks ago on agriculture, nutrition, and health, mostly globally, but also domestically. There was a medical doctor on the program, and he said, how many medical doctors are in this room? There were 650 people in the room. The subject was agriculture, nutrition, and health. He was the only one, okay. And yet, I have also been to meetings with medical doctors and healthcare professionals on the same subject, and there's not one farmer in this room, not one producer in this room, and they're the ones that grow and raise all the food in this country. So, and I don't know how many of them are there in this audience as well. Probably not very many. But
Well, Dan, let's
Okay.
allow
Yeah.
Deborah as our representative.
Okay, good. Well, I'm delighted. No, I know she is.
I got you
That's why I
covered,
said
but-
that, you know.
Deborah is a produce farmer from Ohio. How hard is it to grow produce in Ohio? And how can you convince your traditional farming family
Yeah.
that that's the way that they should really be going?
Our panel is just not long enough for this conversation. You know, I grew up on a traditional dairy operation. My parents and my brother still have 300 head of Holstein. And I think any farming is difficult. I mean, Mother Nature's your boss. So let's just put that out there. But I think where we saw some of the biggest challenges was not actually around demand. It was around figuring out the economics of making it work with the labor, just the intensity of the labor, because we have 35 different kinds of fruits and vegetables versus I grew up with you're growing corn and soybeans. So, and in the succession planting process. But so we actually used to go to the farmer's market in Bexley, but then we ended up moving to our local community, and we were talking about this earlier about finding food and farm country, and we actually had we started selling to our local farmers markets and had a local CSA, community supported agriculture. And what we found was how much more impact we were making when the families came to the farm and they actually understood how it was being grown, and just having that kind of food education incorporated. Just there's less food waste, there's more questions. They would eat the fennel instead of say, what's that weird 5-pronged white thing in my CSA basket, and have it go to waste. They had a lot more questions. But I think with a lot of the work that we do in regards to the half the plate of fruits and vegetables and healthy food access, we really need to make sure that all of our farmers have an economic viability, and helping them with access to land, access to credit. And I know this is probably not something we expected to talk about in this panel, but that's really where there's a lot of barriers for beginning farmers.
Thank you. So I think that helps make that point, that there is a group of people who study agriculture policy, and there is a different and distinct group of people who study food policy. And I think as there are practitioners that do each of those two areas, we need to find more fora to bring those groups together. So Deborah mentioned healthy food access. Hank, I'm going to start with you and we'll come around this way. What does healthy food access mean for your contemporaries in the food processing industry?
I think it's a multi-tiered question. I mean, oftentimes access or food deserts are applied to urban areas, inner city areas, and actually when you look across the country, there's quite a bit of food deserts out in rural communities that we tend to ignore. And actually there's really two buckets, because when we've explored the food deserts, if you would, that meet the definition of food deserts, non-urban, they're lagging a little bit for the other grocery stores in terms of availability, but not radically. You see it more a dearth in inner cities. All right, so I think we have to treat the problem separately instead of lumping everything all together. Secondly, I think there are opportunities, again, looking for alignment and how we make progress here. There's an opportunity for food companies to be shown where the problems are from a health standpoint, what markets are most affected, and what we like to do is we've worked with a group where we've identified a consumer group called the fence sitters, who are the ones looking for better for you. They don't want perfect food. They just want a healthier food for their kids to eat. We've identified them. Also, many of them are lower income. And so you could look at where you find these people. So you look where the problem is, where you have the highest concentration of these people, and that could be a way to concentrate the efforts of marketers and also the public health community to be more effective. So we could really make a quantum leap in terms of whom we help, as opposed to, let's say, treating everything one size fits all and spraying all the resources all over the place. So that's the way I think we could make some good progress.
So is this through targeted reformulation and market distribution?
Yeah, I think some of it's just simply availability of better-for-you products. I think, reformulation is a challenge because the failure rate for new products approaches 90%. All right? Now, our studies have shown that actually better-for-you products, better-for-you lower-calorie products actually have a lower failure rate. So it's in businesses' best interest to be introducing more of these products because they'll have a higher, we call it a stick rate. In other words, they're on the shelves longer, over a longer period of time. So again, it's good for business, but also helps us achieve the public health agenda. So I think those are messages that need to get out there so that we can drive this coming from both directions.
Excellent, thank you.
If you look at our distribution system in our country, it really is remarkable how we deliver packaged items. We do it incredibly well. It's a big country, and stores all across the country are able to get the same products. Where it becomes problematic is when you look at fresh food. And with the convenience store industry, whether you want to call them bodegas, corner stores, convenience stores, 2/3 of them are one-store operations, and the traditional distribution model is once-a-week delivery. Now, if you're getting product delivered once a week, it is very, very difficult to sell fresh. And when you go into these, we heard the discussion earlier today about selling a $1 apple. Well, in these inner cities, whether you talk to the Food Trust in Philadelphia or City Harvest in New York, what usually happens in these urban areas is they do cash and carry. And so they buy their fresh from the competition. They go to Sam's Club, Costco, Walmart, wherever. That's their wholesaler for fresh. Then they take it back to their stores, they resell it at a fair markup. However, when you're buying wholesale and you're selling to the people who can least afford wholesale or the retail as the wholesale price, that's where everything kind of breaks down. And it's very difficult to offer affordable produce, fresh, in some of these urban areas. Same challenges even across the country. So even for those stores that offer fresh, the next step is, we've heard this morning about, you need to change consumers. They tend to do the same thing they did last time. And when you offer fresh, what often happens is you'll try it for a week or two. And you'll order 10 pounds of bananas, and you'll throw out 9 pounds a day. And you'll do that day after day after day, and then you'll cut it back, and you'll cut it back to out of stocks, and then you've lost. And you really need to build in something where you say, I'm going to stay with this for 30 days, for 60 days, for even 90 days, and figure out what to do with the losses. Smoothies, cut them up, do something with them. And so that's the other part of the distribution. Once you have it, how do you sell it until the demand picks up for where you want it?
So can we build on that a little bit? So we are talking about public-private partnerships, and traditionally the government, when we build upon the dietary guidelines, we do it in our federal feeding programs, in SNAP and WIC, and in other areas. How could or should, perhaps, the government help in that transition, in that 90-day period?
I think anybody that's in business, there's two elements. It's like, we'd love the government's help, but we'd like to control how it's done. I think that's a much bigger problem than I can answer in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I'll let some other people
But there are a lot of things. The government's exploring the double-up bucks, for example.
Healthy food financing
Healthy food
initiative.
financing. Farmers markets that promote these things. That's the fastest growing part of American agriculture in terms of relationship with the consumers, the farmers markets in this country. You know, there was a movie years ago called Field of Dreams, and you remember the line, if we build it, they will come. That is being turned on its head in the food industry. It used to be, if we grow it or if we process it, they will buy it. And with modern technology and more modern information, the growing group of consumers that says, yeah, I'll buy it if it tastes good, if it's healthy, if I know where it comes from, and in many cases, if it's available locally. And that's why you're seeing a lot of retailers move into this area. So there are some positive things happening here that we never really saw before. I mean, the trick is that the messages, I go back a little bit before, the messages most consumers get don't reinforce that. And I'm not saying there's anything the government ought to be doing about this, other than maybe making our feeding programs, the nutrition education part of our feeding programs, much more potent than they are now. By and large, I don't think they do very much good at all. They're inadequately funded, and they don't deal with the realities of helping consumers make proper choices or not. But the messages most consumers get is, look, I was a lobbyist for the motion picture industry for 6.5 years. Why is that industry successful? Because it has a way of distributing messages that people accept, they like, they take care of. They like movies, they like entertainment, they like television, they like cable. And so when you watch that stuff, you don't really see the messages of healthy food reinforced in that world because it's not a profitable thing to advertise. I mean, if we could find a way to sell blackberries where the growers could make a lot of money out of this stuff, then we could have a revolution in this country. But it's very difficult to do that kind of thing. And so, I'm rambling a bit, but I do think the food industry is beginning to get this message. I must tell you. Local purchasing is becoming a bigger part. You watch Walmart, they sell 22% of the food in this country. They're the largest retailer of food in America, and they're starting to get a different message about how to comply and support what the consumer wants, and working with local farmers as well. You get more fruits and vegetables grown. One final thing, and I'll stop it. I won't talk any more about it. We need to grow and raise a lot more fruits and vegetables to meet the dietary guidelines, maybe double or triple. And historically, quite honestly, there's a simple reason why we didn't grow fruits and vegetables in big quantities. Our farm programs said that if you grew fruits and vegetables on land that you were getting a payment from the government for wheat or corn or cotton and rice and soybeans, you'd lose the entire payment for wheat, corn, cotton, rice, and soybeans. So what would a farmer in Ohio do? He wouldn't grow fruit, or she wouldn't grow fruits and vegetables. That was, by the way, in large part, a policy promulgated by the fruit and vegetable growers in California and elsewhere. Second of all, you couldn't get crop insurance and risk management programs for fruits and vegetables because the insurance industry wouldn't insure you from the acts of God that would take place. They would insure corn and wheat because there was a crop history there. That's changing. The new Farm Bill now provides an avenue to get that kind of risk management program. That's going to mean a lot more people will be growing fruits and vegetables, and that will mean that the supply will be there in the future, hopefully, for the kinds of things you talked about.
See, you could listen to him ramble all day. Can you? Just dig through those policy nuggets. It's great. The one thing I do want to jump off of, though, because I hope that we can revolutionize blackberries and where we're going with that, is that the First Lady kind of gave a sneak preview to this called the F&V campaign. Has anyone heard of it? The Fruit and Veggie campaign, yeah? And the whole idea of that is we're creating one big iconic brand for fruits and vegetables. And it's every marketing tactic that you've seen on other items, you're now seeing for half the plate, right? Like this is the idea of you're gonna have Colin Kaepernick is gonna be on a billboard, and he's going to be holding up peppers and oranges, and there's all these like phenomenal, you'll be seeing this now, we're actually launching in 2 cities soon, end of May, and it's really exciting. That to me is the future of how to build the demand and how to build the like, even for the side of farmers wanting to grow fruits and vegetables, because there's going to be so much more consumer demand that you'll get a lot of the Ohio farmers transferring their corn and soy to blackberries.
So it's a mix of both push and pull strategies in marketing language that you're going to encourage through promotion as well as encourage through supply.
Both.
Also an opportunity to tag along with your movie expertise, and you can do those big trailers in a world without fruits and vegetables. You know, there's the opening.
You could make a lot of money if you could find a way to
voiceover.
get that
Yeah,
done.
but to this point though, putting on the food marketer's hat for the moment. The challenge has always been that many of them are not in the fresh fruit and vegetable business. I mean, the F&B, fruit and vegetable program.
And frozen, too.
And
because
frozen.
And canned.
Actually,
Canned, yeah.
frozen should be there. The food companies, because they're generally not in that business, and again, they're driven by taste. There is one segment of consumers, and generally they sit in these audiences here in Washington who are willing to eat tree bark as part of their diet. And then let's go meet 83% of your neighbors. And what tends to happen is that taste, convenience, price, value drives the decision. And these folks are the ones that will say, unless it tastes, unless broccoli tastes like a cheeseburger, or I can bury it under cheese, it's not there. So I think there's an opportunity for innovation in the industry, first of all. They don't spend a lot on R&D. There are programs in place where there are actually some incentive programs in some of bills that perhaps could be skewed towards allowing those monies to be given to companies that make healthier products, if you would, instead of going to any old product or package development. And I think it goes back to the consumer, because marketers, a misconception is marketers call all the shots, and the point is, if you've ever been in a focus group and want to see a bunch of scared consumer marketers, that's a fun moment, because they put out their new products and they've got healthy snack bars and what have you, and the consumers go, yuck, and they're back to the drawing board. They would come out with 100% healthy products all day long if they could sell them. So the key is bringing that mentality closer to getting more fruits and vegetables, healthier foods. It's doable. It's just finding those incentives, and I think a lot of it does come back to communication, because there's a lot of confusion among consumers. We had a seminar on Tuesday where we showed that a majority of consumers are very confused about all these messages that are out there. The messages change, I'm not so sure, and then they give up. They just can't do it anymore except for the hardcore. So I think the communication arena is probably the most ripe for us to make a lot of progress here.
Can I just ask Hank a question? Do health messages sell when food marketers are advertising on TV? Or because when you look at most of the ads that are on, restaurant ads or food ads, health is I now see it a little more common than I have before in terms of calories and other kinds of, but largely health is not part of the messages that goes out there.
You know where that works? There's two kinds of product categories. I'm oversimplifying it. Those that generally have a healthy aura to them. I mean, yogurt, for instance, might be water. Products like that have a healthy aura. So you can talk about health all day long and you won't impair that product. You will enhance the offering there. But when you start talking about health on an indulgent product, so this hamburger is healthier for me, ooh, what will that taste like? I mean, those vibes carry over from 2 decades ago when there was the McLean Deluxe. Trying to make a hamburger healthier, more lean, less fat. That thing tastes like cardboard, and those perceptions have stuck both for our industry and for consumers. So I think that's where the line of demarcation is. So again, we talked about this earlier, Deb. There's a stealth health approach that must be applied to more indulgent products and to consumers where health isn't top of the list for them. For those, again, like those in this room who get it, that's okay to talk about a health message because that's a positive enhancement to the discussion.
So stealth health, the idea of hiding the veggies. How do you encourage industry to do even more? Let's start this way again.
Well, I mean, first of all,
Or should we? Let's precurse that with, is that really a responsible?
a lot of this is going to be demand-driven. The fastest growing part of the federal budget is the growth of healthcare costs and Medicare, Medicaid, and chronic disease is the biggest part of that growth. So, I mean, this is a giant national public policy issue. And I give great credit to the First Lady for trying to make this relevant to people and the relationship between what you eat and what you look like, how you exercise, your fitness, and what it will mean for your health care costs. Okay. Anyway, I'll ignore that.
Look what you did, Dan.
I think that the combination of consumer changes and companies will adapt to that because they will respond. And then the healthcare community, and I just want to mention one other thing. the training of doctors and healthcare professionals has by and large ignored the issue of training people for prevention techniques because A, they don't get compensated for it, which is a real factor in the modern world, and B, it's not part of their training. So Secretary Shalala and I and Secretary Leavitt and Veneman went around and we've been talking about this at the Bipartisan Policy Center. What can medical schools, dietitians do a good job, nurses do a better job than physicians do, but by and large, when you go see your physician, he or she either doesn't know anything about the subject matter or doesn't have time to spend any time talking about it. And that is the link, that is a focal point that is often ignored in this entire discussion. Most people, thank you, most people when they change their health, most people, particularly if they're my age, change it because there's a warning signal. Your blood sugar's too high, or you've got some other kind of problem. And somehow the physician or the healthcare provider can be a powerful voice to get folks to change. And they're kind of gone from this discussion as well.
Yeah, I think the consumers are incredibly powerful in this. They're the ones that they're driving what the industry is doing. And what I'm actually really excited about, and we hadn't talked about this previously, but I'm excited about where technology can go with this and with innovation. I mean, we think about where we look at Uber, right? People use Uber as a verb. Like, how do you Uberize something? How do you Uberize Snap and Wick so it's easier for people to be receiving these benefits? Like, there's so much out there that we haven't even tapped into, of the ability of access to information where 80% of society will have smartphones in the next 2 years. It's a crazy statistic, and don't quote me on that, but I read it recently that it blew my mind. And just the ability to actually transfer knowledge and for them to have the social programs that they need more efficiently and to deliver that more efficiently, I feel like we're at this precipice of a whole new era of being able to deliver these programs in a transformational way. You tell me, what do you think? You think we're there?
I think we're getting there because I think information is power and more consumers are having access to better information, and companies are responding to this. I think the food industry actually successful food companies will respond to this. Without question.
Chipotle's delivering burritos now, Imagine if we can take that to delivering SNAP, again, in a more efficient, cost-effective way. I think that's what we need to challenge industry to find ways to do that for the most vulnerable in society.
We have an opportunity now with the new dietary guidelines being considered that is also an opportunity as both the House and Senate committees are thinking about reauthorization of our feeding programs. How do you then create an Uber-like experience to talk through the WIC and SNAP programs and the school feeding programs and the standards therein? What would it look like?
It's a good question. I think it's actually something that we could do. I'm not promising this, but I think it's something that we could do where we have a convening where we bring in the best and the brightest from the tech industry and present them with the problems that we have with delivery and with food access and see what kind of solutions we come up together. Because I think that some of those conversations have not been had to date.
So that's a different way of thinking about access as opposed to building it and it will come, as delivering it and we'll get the food to you rather than you to the store.
Well, when you talk
Jeff's not going to
about-
like that.
Well, when you talk about SNAP program, for instance, they use electronic cards now. And if you think about, again, think of yourselves potentially as a brand manager for health, all right? So what marketing tactics can you apply to improving what people purchase, all right? So as examples, you could reward people for purchasing better for you products. I mean, they get X dollars, just like they do couponing. Sometimes when you check out at a grocery store and then all of a sudden they issue a few extra coupons for another brand, well, you could make certain incentives for those healthier, better for you brands to be issued. The other thing is perhaps consider restructuring the way the reward system. Right now it's based on dollars, all right? You need X dollars a month, all right? And then you run out of your money. Well, maybe it's aligned to calories as an example. That'll teach behavior change, all right? You can figure out what the cost per calorie is, and you'll see that shift just by incenting people because they'll make the choices. So I think you have a lot, going back to electronics here, there's a lot of devices out there that need a total rethink to help us deliver a message that also helps the marketers sell their better for you products, because, by the way, that's in their best interest anyway, because that's where the growth is for them.
But presumably you do it in a positive, reinforcing way. You've just made this choice of fruits and vegetables will reward you with double up bucks, as opposed to vilifying.
Well, I think that's important. I also think there's a very important point. It showed up earlier here and in an earlier panel. When we talk about fruits and produce in general, we are a nation of assemblers. We're not cooks anymore. We assemble food. And this has been going, you can watch this over the last 2 decades, it's been happening. And I think we need to help the consumer, because they go into that section and it's like, what do I do with this stuff? So it can't just sit there. It has to be more applications oriented. Again, I think pulling in, if you think about where is the money sits with the packaged goods companies. So how do you pull some of that marketing money into the produce section, so there's joint cross-merchandising, things like that, so you can get some resources behind the produce, so they're more visible, you show them how it's used, as opposed to it's just sitting there looking pretty, because it's been sitting there looking pretty for decades. So how do we take it to the next level?
Well, as Deb mentioned, I mean, there's a classic problem for a retailer in that area is shrink, waste, right?
A lot of
And
waste.
it's the first category we reach when we go into a retailer, so we hope that it symbolizes a good starting point of the shopping experience. But what can we do to reduce waste?
You know, we waste about 35% of our food in this country and worldwide through rot, through spoilage. And the problems in this country are largely due to affluence, although there are other issues, whereas overseas they're due to no refrigeration, no electricity, no roads, whatever kind of thing that we can deal with. And the largest part of, you look at grains are about 20% wasted, and fish is about the same, but fruits and vegetables are the 40 to 50% in this country and everywhere else. A lot of that is because we're affluent. If a piece of fruit or vegetable has a nick on it, we tend to throw it away where it can be as healthy as we did before. A lot of this is part of the public education effort to let people know what's healthy for them. And the food industry, I agree with Hank. I think the packaged food industry has great opportunities here to take what they produce and really, really develop a system of providing healthier products with better education and better communications. Look at the WIC program. The WIC program, by the way, is a program where the United States government tells people what they can buy. It's not based on choice at all. And it's argued we do that because we're dealing with a vulnerable population, pregnant women and young children. Our other programs don't do that at all, and I understand why, although it is interesting. It's very hard to get the data and statistics on what people actually buy when they use SNAP benefits, and it would be interesting to know whether they're buying a different kind of quantity of type of items and everything else. But going back to Hank's point, there's great opportunities here because of the way people actually eat today, and the question is, can the food companies move in that direction?
I think the other thing that's missing is look at the picture up here. They're having fun. And I think that's missing to a certain extent from food. We tell them what they can't do. We say healthy. Healthy doesn't sound like fun. It really isn't a call to action. And you're absolutely right when we heard that the only time you really change your behavior is a health crisis. So it's not going to do anything. So how can we talk about food a little differently? How can we, instead of talking about the features, talking about the benefits?
Yes.
And I think people may see there's fiber in something, but they don't know what fiber does. They don't necessarily know what potassium does or vitamin D. So how can we just take those simple things, whether it's combining, having a smoothie that has all fruits and vegetables, yogurt, good things for you, and it's a 2:30 pick-me-up. You've defined it as that. You've defined it as doing something, not just healthy.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So let's move to recommendations. We've talked about public-private partnerships. How do we engage all players, firms, consumers, and the government in making sure that this dietary guidelines set of recommendations that we will see at some stage this year, how do we all play a role in our shared responsibility? What are our recommendations for moving forward?
Well, I think there's opportunities for the public health community and industry to sit down. I think a couple of things have to happen, and we had this discussion on Tuesday. One is there needs to be clarification of where the scientific / public health / medical community stands on a lot of these issues. So one of the hot button issues are like artificial sweeteners. So, some people say we have a problem, others say FDA approves it, we're okay on it. Let's get something out there because the blogosphere has hijacked that issue. Okay, you have non-experts out there spewing out what the position is on that. So I think clarification of that. Secondly, I think coming together on the guidelines. I think a good point was made in one of the earlier panels, and that is the guideline, this list of guidelines is great from a policy formation perspective. It's horrible from a consumer communication perspective. So how do we shape messaging, to Jeff's point just now, from a benefits perspective, all right? Because people don't have this list in their head. They don't buy a salt. They don't buy a sugar. They buy an end product to eat or drink. And I think some simplified and cohesive messaging. The third piece is, again, with industry in the room, find ways to have industry leverage their capabilities. They bring the resources in terms of dollars. They understand the consumer, all right, and they can make an impact. If anybody understands how to communicate to the consumer, and this is also in their best interest. You look at a classic example of what happened in the beer business with the drunk driving, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and guess what? Anheuser-Busch steps up and says, all right, know when to say when, and you have designated drivers. Guess what? The business still grew, so it didn't hurt. It actually was the right thing to do, and it was actually a positive for industry. So how do we get this debate exactly in that framework?
Your win-win scenario that
It's
you
win-win.
mentioned before.
There are plenty of win-wins here, and if I have one message, they're here. We just have to exploit them and be persistent tweaking these out.
Excellent.
Try to do it quickly. I think just more recognition that with a lot of consumers, the dinner plate isn't a plate. It's sometimes a cup holder. It's sometimes your hand. It's sometimes just walking around. And so how do we look at things, particularly vegetables? What are the on-the-go vegetables? And I'm just thinking about how many people drive and eat. I'm fine with them drinking or eating carrots out of a cup. I'm not cool with them eating a kale salad while driving with a fork. So what are those
kale
opportunities? Kale smoothies work.
smoothie.
Kale salad with a fork, I don't like. Not while driving.
That's tweetable. I just want to go off of the fun piece of this, actually, as the recommendation, where the First Lady has obviously been such a tremendous champion of translating science and policy into digestible messages for consumers. But just yesterday, we were in a meeting, and the question was about, so how much water should you drink in a day? Do you guys know?
8 glasses a day.
8 glasses. It's actually 1.5 liters, right? And so we broke it down to 8 glasses. And so okay, so how do we get this message across to the average person? How do they actually remember this? Like, oh, create a cheer, 2, 4, 6, 8, hydrate. Like that kind of thing. You teach a child while they're brushing their teeth, they will actually remember to drink 8 glasses. It's just those little things that you can incorporate, and you make it fun. You're not lecturing. You're not wagging a finger. You're making it into the changing of the culture and just making it fun. And I think that is something that we, as policymakers, can challenge ourselves to be better at.
I'd say 3 things. Number 1, notwithstanding the complexity of the dietary guidelines, this is really important. This is some of the most important thing the United States government does in providing information to consumers. So even though they don't work perfectly, this is a great public policy initiative that's done. It's been done for the last 3 or 4 decades. And so number 2 is the messaging has to be simple. Complicated, complex messaging doesn't work for consumers at all. And the messaging needs to be more uniform, needs to be in more sectors, needs to be marketed better. The Advertising Council of America needs to figure out how to get a hold of it. Third of all, I want to go back to this marketing because I think it's really important. If you ask me my simple solution, I would say the food industry ought to get together and produce a marketing campaign for health information about foods. And, you know, we did this a little bit with tobacco, obviously, but it was more negative than positive. I think this needs to be a positive message. And because I still tell you today, with this lifestyle we live, with very few two-parent families at home, with kids watching 6 and 8 hours of television a day, I mean, and that's another public policy initiative, then we got to figure out, well, how can we get different messages to these people, particularly kids, as part of this whole thing. You used to have these promotion programs. Remember the dancing raisins in California? And you know, and got milk and pork the other white meat. And of course, that was industry specific, and it did some good. But we have to figure out a way to get messages to people, and it will be slow to work through the system. It's very incremental, but it will change behavior. I can tell you that.
There's a sub-theme. Our prior panel mentioned about chewing a raisin before you eat, and now, you know, we aren't sponsored, I can assure you, by the Raisin Board, although my wife did some work for them many years ago. Let's open up for questions, please. We've already got somebody at the back that is burning with a question.
I'm burning, yes. My name is Dan Silverstein. I'm a private sector and capital markets advisor in agricultural development. I think because I'm of the private sector, I have no patience. I'm sorry, I try to be patient, and I just don't have any. Is there some reason that I've missed why we haven't offered tax incentives to any company that wants to undertake a communications campaign about better nutrition? And the first company that comes to my mind is Intel, a company which thinks about how people think and has nothing to do with the food business, and consequently has no vested interests in whether there is a difference in nutritional guidelines on sweeteners and carbohydrates. And because they're going to be incentivized to do so, they're going to undertake a campaign that serves their interests and the public's interest. Thanks.
I mean, my general reaction to that is I like the idea of incentives because I think things happen when there are incentives, as opposed to, for instance, something that we talked about on a Tuesday session. And that was, if you look at the language in this dialogue, going back to this last conversation about making things more happy and fun, it's a draconian approach. It's restrict this, ban that, tax the other thing. And that's a mentality that doesn't incent action. So I'm all for making modifications on some of the R&D for food ingredients and packaging rules that are in place that skew towards healthier foods. I don't know where that stands now, but I would be in favor of something like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I just really wish there were a computer giant out there named after produce that we could tie something to.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Liz Unger. I am a master's student at NYU's Food Studies
I'm
program.
sorry, we
Can't hear you.
can't hear you.
Oh, hello?
Yes, much
Hi,
better.
my name is Liz Unger. I am a master's student at NYU's Food Studies program. I just had a question about subsidies. They were mentioned beforehand in the other panels. Is the answer switching subsidies from corn and soy to fruits and vegetables? Would that even solve a problem, and is it possible?
Well, first of all, just so that you know, fruits and vegetables in many parts of the country have subsidies. They're called marketing orders. They basically are restrictions on the amount you can produce in order to keep price high, or they may be distribution-oriented subsidies. They also had a subsidy which prevented you from growing fruits and vegetables in parts of the country like Ohio or Kansas, practically. That's a subsidy. Now, it's not a direct payment from Uncle Sam like we see in corn, wheat, cotton, rice, and soybeans. And those subsidies are actually coming down as we move to a more risk management, crop insurance type of system of agriculture in this country. And now we're finding that fruits and vegetables are going to be eligible for that, and those are heavily subsidized too. So one of the things you learn about agriculture is for those people who think we're going to go to a subsidy-free agriculture, they're going to have to go to a different planet, because that's probably never going to happen in America.
Just 2 rows ahead of the last questioner.
Hi, you talked about simplicity, Mr. Glickman, and it seems to me that a way to sum this all up in a way that could be very profound is to use the word organic, to go organic, because it eliminates all these chemicals and all these health concerns that emanate from that. And yet, that message isn't out there. And instead, you have inordinate influence at the highest levels of government by a few special interest companies that control the agricultural system. And it seems that unless you attack the agricultural system and change it fundamentally, we're going to be stuck in the same rut. The message is, I mentioned organic before. Chipotle recently announced that it went organic. Instead of applauding that gesture, you see in the mainstream media this kind of attack dog, these attack dog stories on this gesture, which the public wants, the public demands, but the public is not, it's not getting because of this inordinate special interest. Why don't...
Can I summarize that a little bit? Because one of the things we didn't as a panel discuss, and I don't think we did all morning, in fact, was this extension of the dietary guidelines into sustainability. Mm-hmm. So perhaps let's kind of, as briefly as we can, pivot off of that question and think about sustainability. As organic may be an example of that, local may be an example of that.
Maybe I'll just bring a consumer perspective into that, just for contrast to that. As I mentioned before, there are different consumer segments, and this audience tends to be in what we call the well-being arena. So your question is exactly spot center of that, where the concept of organic or perhaps non-GMO or gluten-free, et cetera, is highly important to a group of consumers that comprise about 17% of the population. It is not the consensus of the rest of the neighbors. So we have to be careful about what we want from a pure public health perspective versus what the consumer is willing to pay for and that cares about. So I think we have to be very cautious. Again, I'm oversimplifying 3 different kinds of groups. So you have the organic issue. First of all, organic is growing the quickest. All right, that's the good news. But that's a % growth on a smaller base. And there's a point of diminishing return in terms of who cares, who doesn't care about it. So I think we just have to put that in perspective. I'm not even making a judgment whether it's good or bad. It's just that when we take an issue like that, we have to be careful that we don't overweight it as if that's what everyone wants, because we're not seeing that in the consumer.
Well, you're not going to change the attitude of smokers who want to smoke, if that's what they want to do, and you're not going to change...
I think that's extreme, though. This middling group doesn't need to go all the way there. They just want better for you, and organic may or may not be a choice all the time. They may do it periodically, but they're not 100% have to have everything organic.
And that's again, because it's more expensive, because subsidies make it more expensive.
Hank addressed the consumer angle. Let me address the product angle, and maybe you can all do this simple little focus group at home. Give people 2 choices. They can get an organic yogurt or they can get a regular yogurt. And more often than not, you'll see they'll probably take the organic one. Why? It tastes better. At least that's their perceptions. You can listen to what the Cornell Food Lab says. And then you take another thing and you say, I have 2 cookies for you. One is organic, one isn't. And see how many people take that organic cookie. No. And it comes down to taste. It comes down to benefits. It comes down to fun. So there is a consumer element and there's a product element that make it much more complex.
Yep.
But at least we should level the playing field. The playing field is not level. That's why organic food is so much more expensive and why so many people are inclined not to buy it.
Well, let me just say this. It's an interesting question. I'm not in the business, so I don't focus groups. What I find is when you talk to them on the street back in my part of the country, the heartland of the country, they want price, they want taste, they want safety, and they want access and availability. And within that mix, there's still a pretty good trust that the government does a pretty good job on the safety side of the picture. And in the last several years, we've had the organic movement grow. I had a lot to do with that in terms of implementing the Organic Standards Act at USDA, and it's a very important part of agriculture. But it's not going to feed the world, I can tell you that right now. It's one of the tools that people have as a matter of choice. So I'm a big, strong advocate of organic food, but I also am realistic to know that there are different strokes for different folks in this country, and that will probably, with food, that's probably always going to be the thing. What we don't want to do is inhibit the growth of this industry unnecessarily. If I may add the question on sustainability, because that's been the hottest topic on the dietary guidelines, or one of them. What should these guidelines do to do more than just advise people on food, but advise people on the implications of growing food? And I don't know whether you've taken a position on these things. I won't put you on the spot. But, you know, so it has to do with, for example, meat and methane and carbon emissions and all sorts of other things, and pesticides and water, and how you grow food and how it impacts the environment, and whether that ought to be part of the dietary guidelines or not. And there are people in this room who know a lot more than that. My point in all of this is that if this gets too complicated, nobody's going to follow these rules. And by and large, people have believed that the dietary guidelines are a good way to get information for health purposes. And I just think we need to be careful if this becomes a grab bag for every environmental issue in the history of the world. I'm not saying that additional information isn't needed on those issues, but when you're giving people basic information on what to eat, largely for their direct health benefits, we have to be careful and not go too broad, or else they'll tune it all out, and that's a big danger, potential danger.
Well, one thing we need to consider, just as a final comment, is take the California water crisis. When you look at the pie chart that I was surprised to see, 80% of the water usage is coming from agriculture. So talk about a conundrum. We're trying to get people to eat more fruits and vegetables, and at the same time, that's the biggest contributor to the California water problem. So again, how do we balance that out? I don't think we have that answer now, but that's why I do think sustainability has to be part of this equation.
I'm sorry to say we're out of time, but that was a very interesting discussion. My apologies to the last person holding the mic. He's got the conch there. I want to thank our panel one more time.
Thank you.